Hey everyone, Hannah and Posey here from Bears Den Essentials. So I'm coming to you on Memorial Day weekend before I'm about to get started with a bunch of knitting that I have to do. You can tell that it's kind of sunny, kind of gray. It's an interesting in-between kind of day for Memorial Day weekend, but the weather is beautiful. It's not too hot, slightly breezy. We get a lot of wind where we live in southwest Montana, and we also get a lot of critters. So Posey is out doing her sniffing rounds before we go inside to do quite a bit of knitting. I am preparing for Old Salt Festival this year at the end of June, where I'll be a vendor. So building up inventory for that. I'm also preparing a grant for the USDA Rural Business Development program that they offer. So it'll be a chance to hopefully apply for some more support to grow and scale. And I also have a few orders that I have to work on. So it's going to be a busy weekend, but luckily it's also a fun weekend with a lot of sports to watch. The Knicks are playing game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals, which that's crazy to me. The last time they made it to the championship round was when I think I was 12. I think it was 1999. So yeah, I was 12 or 13. I'm forgetting the math and how old I am, which I tend to do sometimes. Part of denial of being an elder millennial. But anyways, I've been trying to get better about recording my process and sort of how my business operates, what I work on, and I think people tend to have some questions about the machines that I use, just so you can get insights into what I do. And with that, I do want to show you the different machines that I use, what I can make on them, and the creative process, which I would call it a method to my madness because I think it's probably the most accurate description for my creative process. I get kind of a wild hair when it comes to my different designs. A good example of that is the shawl collar cardigan that I make, where I love the history and the traditions of baseball. And as a kid who grew up in the 90s in New York and New Jersey, one of the first baseball players I ever learned about was Babe Ruth, and I watched The Sandlot a lot as a kid. And so seeing that old shawl collar cardigan that he used to wear at games, in photos and documentaries, I really wanted to create one like that. My raglan sweater that I make, I I really have always liked that shaping of how raglans look on both men and women, and I like that it's so flattering on so many different body types. Something that's really important to me with all of my designs is creating silhouettes that aren't necessarily going to be trendy for like a season or two, but they're going to be versatile, flattering, evergreen for years and years, so that when you reach for the knits, they continue to be something that you feel good about, feel confident in for years to come. And so I want to talk through that process, that design, because the thing about knitting, whether it's hand knitting or machine knitting, it does feel like you're kind of knittering and nattering. So that's, I think, why I said that. Um, I I think the thing about all those kinds of crafts, whether it's with fiber or thread, quilting, a lot of it is the process as much as it is the end result. And I think that's what I like so much about it. And so I want to bring you into that process with me. So I'm going to take you with me on a day in the life of me knitting a big order, starting to get creative with some other ideas, and also preparing for the Old Salt Festival. And I'm going to try to do these videos on a little bit more of a regular basis for y'all. So stay tuned. So the first machine I'm going to work with today, and I actually probably going to stick to just one machine today for my knitting, is my Titexma TH160. And this was actually the first machine that we ever got. We got it, I think it was end of 2020, beginning of 2021, when we first really realized this was something that we wanted to do as a business. And Mark, my husband, was really supportive of me really trying to take this and run with it and grow it. And so we invested in this mid-gauge machine. And part of why, so I'll just give you a little tour of it. Part of why we chose this as our first machine is because it actually creates knits that are very similar to what you knit by hand. So the translation for me felt a little bit more seamless than if I had started with a standard gauge machine, which tends to knit with finer yarns. Not that I don't use similar weight yarns at times, but I've always really liked worsted weight yarn, which is by knitting standards a little bit on the thicker side. So this is yarn from Brown Sheep Nature Spun Yarn, which I've been knitting with Brown Sheep yarn since I was 6. They have been around. They're a mill in Nebraska, and it's family run. They have 100% US wool, and it's exciting to be able to support them just because they care about sustainability. They care about family agriculture instead of those consolidated monolith corporations that don't necessarily give back to the families on the ground. So this is a company that I really like because they support land stewardship, natural wildlife populations, family businesses, all things that are really important to me. So getting to work with their yarn is such a dream come true. And a lot of my knits actually use Brown Sheep yarn. I did a big batch. This is part of an order that I have this week to fulfill of 9 hats. So I have 4 more to do this week. And these are all uh, Brown Sheep yarn. So what's cool, this is the tobacco root hat. This is an adult small. I do still need to block it so it'll bloom and stretch a little bit, but this is our tobacco root hat. We live right at the base of the Tobacco Root Mountains. So when I look out my window, and actually my wedding ring as well is the Tobacco Root Mountains right outside of our home. So really important to us, and we really love those mountains. Mark just got back from the mountain bike ride up there. We like to go hiking. We always go up there to get our Christmas tree since it's national forest land, and that helps with wildfire mitigation come summertime. So this hat design is really special to us. Mark actually developed the design, and he kindly lets me use it for the hats that I sell for Bearsden Essentials. Also have some really beautiful base colors. This is a pretty winter blue that I always come back to because it reminds me a lot of those kind of blue-gray skies that you get on really snowy days. And can't go wrong with beautiful pumpkin, pumpkin orange, and basic, but anything but basic gray. So for the rest of this order, just banged the machine, I actually am going to deviate a little bit from some of the more natural colors, and they ordered 2 safety hat colors that we offer, which is this Hunter's Orange and the neon pink that you can see here on the machine. So these colors I really like, and we have a few hats at Shedhorn Sports. I think the pink is sold out, but I like making these colors, especially for folks who go out into the woods during the fall season. It keeps you safe. You can't miss your head bopping around through the woods, so safety is really important. Plus, these colors are really fun and vibrant, and while they're not necessarily nature inspired, they serve getting out into nature in a way that's safe and responsible recreation. So, really like these, really appreciate the yarn is a little bit hard to find, especially yarn that's thoughtfully made and sustainably made and isn't going to leach toxic chemicals onto you. So these hats are special because it's tricky to get the yarn. So, and getting yarn here in the US, there's a lot of beautiful indie dyers, but getting enough yarn and in the amounts that I tend to need, that can be a little bit tricky. So I really appreciate mills like Brown Sheep that are still in operation just because those kinds of places are hard to find. And one of my other favorite mills, Jagger Spun, you can see their little name, it's upside down, but they just sadly closed. I think it was either the end of last year or beginning of last year. I bought a bunch of their dead stock yarn that I plan to use for different designs, and it's really heartbreaking when mills close just because you understand why they have to, but you wish that there were more abilities to keep the supply chains here in the US, and you just recognize that it's really hard. So trying to use up some of that dead stock yarn and still celebrate the traditions of Jagger Spun, continuing to lift up the beautiful yarn of Brown Sheep, and always looking for more great yarn suppliers here within the US, whether it's wool or cotton. Always interested, and even sustainable acrylic. I know some people have allergies to wool or they don't really like cotton, and so some of our knits we do use what's called Oikotex certified acrylic yarn so that it won't, again, leach those bad things onto your skin. It feels really buttery soft, and it's still aligned with what's important to us here at Bear's Den Essentials. So what I want to turn to now is the actual knitting. I didn't get to finish this late last night. It was a Friday night and I wanted to eat dinner and hang out a little bit after a busy week. So this was hanging on the machine. The thing about knitting machines is a key piece to working them effectively is one, carriage maintenance. So this is the carriage that you run back and forth. So making sure the carriage is well taken care of, making sure, and I am pushing the envelope a little bit with how thick this yarn is, but making sure that the yarn is the right density for it so that your machine is happy with you. I can tell if I'm using yarn that's too thick on a given machine, or conversely if I'm using yarn that's too thin in density, because if it's too fine or thin for this machine, it's just going to look almost like fish hose, and it's not going to really give you that aesthetic that you're looking for most of the time with this. You can see a bunch of my swatches up here from different projects, different ideas. Sometimes it's just messing around and wanting to see what something might look like on the machine. So again, this yarn is kind of pushing the envelope a little bit, but my mid gauge can handle it. The needles are spaced about 6 feet apart. I'm going to switch the direction of my camera so you can see. So this is the model. It's Taiwanese, and I got it shipped here. So this is the knitting machine part, and this is the ribber. You can see I use it a lot because the tape for counting the needles is all chewed up, and it's just completely gone up here. So I use this machine probably the most. It even has my little markers on it. It's a little bit dirty because I didn't clean it last night, which is not a good practice, but you have all my yarn for projects I plan to do later this week, my scrap yarn that I used for taking stuff on and off the machine, the different tools, more tools in here, trying to keep track of them. This is probably my favorite tool. This is what you use to transfer stitches between this machine and this machine. I lift this machine up. I'll show you later on when I make one of my next hats. But the needles are about, I can't remember if it's 6.5 millimeters apart or 6 millimeters, but that creates the really nice knit that looks very similar to hand knitting. And I am always transparent that the knits I make for Bear's Den Essentials are on my knitting machine. And I do that just because there is debate about whether or not using a knitting machine is cheating or not. And it's definitely faster, but the learning curve, oh my gosh, especially because you hang weights at the bottom of the knitting machine, the learning curve definitely involves, you see these weights, these keep the carriage able to run smoothly over the yarn, because if you don't have a little bit of weight, then the carriage kind of jumps and the yarn doesn't stay on the needle. So you see the little spinny, to use a technical term, you see the wheels and the little mechanics. Without weight, the hat will just jump right off and you won't be able to keep the knit on the machine. So the learning curve, and it's tricky because I learned how to hand knit so long ago that I don't necessarily remember. And when you're 6, I don't know, you're just thinking about other things and you're not as worried about being perfect. which I think is great for learning because you're just, I don't know about you, but I just wasn't as hard on myself at the time. But with machine knitting, it's completely different mechanics. It's still got a lot of hand-eye coordination that you need and fine motor skills, but it does require a level of patience. And as I've mentioned, knitting is very much about the process. So you have to be comfortable with the fact that you're going to take knits apart and have to redo them. And I will say, fixing errors on my knitting machine tends to be harder than hand knitting because you can just rip out a couple rows. But with knitting on the machine, you sometimes have to take the whole thing apart and start over again because that's sometimes the easiest. I have gotten better about fixing some errors than I used to, but it does require a level of patience. Either way, knitting on these machines, so this one is still in production, but the other two, I have three, I actually have four other knitting machines, but the other two knitting machines that I use regularly, I think they would be classified as antiques because they're over 40 years old. I don't remember what the age is for antique. They're definitely vintage or whatever name you want to put on them. They've been out of production for a long time. And it's sad because they are these just wonderful workhorses they were in production before sadly planned obsolescence of material objects became really normalized. Kind of like if you have a fridge from the 70s or the 80s, the thing's going to last longer than you. And same with old washing machines, as opposed to some of the newer products where you're like, really hope I get like 5 years out of this thing, or my phone, which is way past the warranty and I still use it. Um, there's there's just this motivation to continue to buy and consume goods after a few years. Whereas with these older knitting machines that I use, these things are designed to last for a long time. And there's a really awesome machine knitting community that I found on Facebook, of all places. A lot of them are folks over in the UK, different places around the world. And a lot of them are also, there's a lot of folks here too that I've made friends with that help me answer questions when I'm dealing with like a mechanical issue or trying to learn a new technique. And I really appreciate the community. I think there's, for the majority of folks are really supportive and want to see you just have fun and be creative, whether you're doing it for business or you're doing it for yourself just for fun, whatever it may be. Folks want to see you enjoy these machines so that I would call it an art form, so that this art form isn't lost over time. And yeah, it's fun over time. And so I know I kind of got off track a little bit, but I'm trying to introduce all aspects of the business, and that includes how I got started with this. And this machine, it is, as I mentioned, still in production. I do really like it. It's kind of no frills. It doesn't have any punch cards or electronics, so all the patterning is manually manipulated by me, and it's it's just such a great workhorse of a machine. I really feel fortunate because I do think a lot of them are on back order right now because production is still a little bit behind. So a hat that might take me 12 to 14 hours to knit now takes me about an hour to make. And while that might be cheating, it's something that allows me to make really good quality knits for people at a rate that's sustainable for me, for the business, that doesn't hurt me physically too much, because every knitter and crafter knows that these are your instruments, and if you hurt them, you're not able to do the thing that you love the most. And so that is a whole other level of anxiety. So that being said, I do need to work on my posture. So you'll see me running the carriage and that's a whole other level of like musculature. So without further ado, I'm going to work on the crown of this hat. So something that I developed, I didn't patent it or anything, but I developed a 4-corner crown decrease that is very similar to what you see with hand knit hats. And this technique basically requires me to manually move stitches over. So I do need to push these all back, But what I do, let me bring you in closer. So I did do a whole video on the 4-corner crown decrease and how to make a hat. So if you want a step-by-step tutorial as a fellow knitter, I'll tag that video in the caption somehow. I'm still learning how to do that. So what I need to do now to create the crown that I showed you, I've done the ribbing, I've done this part, I've done the body, I've done this part. So now I need to do the transitions in the crown. So what you see here is which needles to move. This is my cheat sheet that I always keep handy for my crowns just because I do make a lot of hats. So for a 90 stitch hat, this is which stitches I count over to and move in. For an 80 stitch hat, that's the count that I start with. Here's the tricky part with this one. This is actually a child size hat, which is 86 stitches. So I'm in between these two, which requires me to get a little bit creative with my math. But again, I'm still very analog, and I did write that down in my book. So I have which stitches to move in here. I do have a backup to this, but a lot of my initial hat designs are written down here. So you can see a lot of my math, a lot of my notes to myself. I know that doesn't help me seem any less ancient, but the thing is I did just read this the other day. When you write stuff by hand, you internalize it a little bit more than if you type it out on a screen. So me writing the patterns down really allows me to internalize what my designs are, where I might make mistakes, and where I might need to make tweaks and everything. So I stand by it, and I do make photocopies just to play on the safe side, because I don't want to lose what I've created, and it'd probably make me go a little crazy if I did, just because the designs, they do take a lot of trial and error, and I don't want to lose what I put into them. So here we go. Here's the math that I need, and looks like I need to decrease stitch number 9 to 10 first. So I'm going to use my utensils. And by utensils, I mean instruments. It's clearly getting close to lunchtime. So I like to use this. You can use either side. There's the 3-prong tool and then the single. And I use it to count. So I'm going to count 9 stitches in. So I'll try to bring you in close. So I have this stitch pulled out that I need. I'm going to move 1 stitch over. And then I'm going to move the next one. So stitch 9 to 10 and 12 to 11. That creates that lovely converging ridge that you see for the crown. So then I need to count to stitch number 30 for the next one. So this is stitch number 12. So here's stitch 30. I'm going to move that one in. Ooh, sorry. So this is stitch 30. And then next is stitch number 51. So here's stitch 51. Move that. Do that. A little cheat is to just go to the end and count in 9. Perfect. So this is really handy when you just need to move 1 stitch, but when I need to transfer several stitches, this is my favorite tool. I found it somewhere on eBay. I lucked out that it fits my machine perfectly because you want it to perfectly align with the stitches. So if it were any bigger, it'd be too wide, or smaller, it'd be too narrow. So this one fits for lifting up the stitches perfectly. And what I do, let me just lower you a little bit. And what I do is I pick up the stitches and I move them in. So And I do that till all these little gaps are moved in. So it does require a little bit of manual manipulation, and this is where I would argue some of the artistry comes into play. Because no, you're not, it takes less time to run the carriage when you're actually just going back and forth, where the time and energy that you expend comes into play is moving your stitches around on the machine itself and increasing and decreasing. So I'm just going to finish moving these in. So I've successfully moved all of the stitches in, and now this is why I think people might assume that knitting on the machine is cheating, because this is the part that they see. So I'm going to knit 2 rows. So very fast. That was 86 stitches that I just knit in like 30 seconds. However, the part where there's more work, as I mentioned, is the hand manipulation, because now I need to do that. I need to find the stitches that I moved in. So these were 2. I feel for the bump. These 2 and these 2. And then I need to effectively do that again. Transfer the stitches over on the outside of those 2 inner ones and do that all across. Didn't make that easy on myself. Oops. There we go. Go all the way across for these 4. And give it a little tug just to make sure the weight is good. And now I need to transfer all the stitches in again. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to repeat this until I have 14 rows. So I'm going to do 7 decreases and 14 rows for the crown. So that'll give me, I think it's like 1.5 to 2 inches for the crown decrease, depending on if it's for an adult or a child. So between 1.5 to 2 inches for the crown. So I will repeat this, and that takes me about, I don't know, like 20 minutes to do, and you'll see the sped up version of that now. So I just finished my last row. I did 14. And what I do is I take the yarn out of the sinker plate. That's what the metal part is called on the carriage. And then remove the last 2 weights. You don't want these to drop on your foot. This is duct tape because it broke, and it broke landing on my toe. And I'm pretty sure I broke it from doing that. It is quite painful. So what I do, I take my needle selector. This is if you want to select every other needle. This is if you want to select all of them. I have ones for selecting every 2x2, 2x1. They're handy. So I need to pull, or I need to push, I should say, all the needles out. So they're all out. I'm going to take the hanger off. I put these little key fobs on them to make hanging the weight, not key fobs, I put the little key rings on them to make hanging the weight easier. Shout out to my friend Juan for that tip. Like I said, the knitting community, they really help you with learning how to make the most out of your machines, because they have so much capabilities, and figuring that out requires a lot of patience and a lot of trial and error, and friends go a long way to making it a worthwhile process. So I have to cut the yarn, leaving enough of a tail. And then you see my yarn threader, this little grasshopper thing, that's gonna bounce back, and you can see where it rubs against the wall, and I'll have to repaint it. I take my yarn needle, or darning needle is another good word for it. I really like the ones that have the hook on it. Thread the yarn into it, and then gently bring the knit forward without taking it off the needles before I thread it through this yarn, because this is basically going to be the crown of the hat that I'm going to cinch. So let me take this off, selecting one needle at a time carefully. If you lose one stitch, then whoop, it goes all the way to the bottom, and you're having to fix about 90 rows by hand, which is not fun. Can't remember how many stitches I have remaining. It looks like I have about 30 stitches left. So that looks a lot better than 86 stitches cinched. It gives you that nice tight loop that you can thread through. And I just think aesthetically having that shaping at the top, while more work, it gives you a really polished, finished look that I like. So part of why we do hats so often before I started with garments is because that's what we were knitting a lot of by hand during the pandemic. So when I started Bearsden Essentials, and when Mark was still part of the business, my husband, we were making everything by hand. We were selling on Etsy. And in fairness, this was just something like fun that we were initially doing. And I was in the middle of writing my book. So it was kind of a vehicle to handle the irony. But what I meant to say, that was probably like a Freudian slip, but the uncertainty of the time that we were in, and we were making everything by hand. And so when we got these knitting machines and we were thinking about starting to scale and have me taking it over, we really wanted to continue to do hats, and we really wanted to continue to do the kind of shaping that we had been doing by hand. And so that's where I spent a lot of time figuring out how to do that 4-corner crown decrease on the knitting machine. Next steps here is seaming by hand. I use the mattress stitch to create an invisible seam. For example, I guess you can kind of see it, but it's really subtle so that it matches the rest of the hat on both the ribbing and the body. And it just creates a really polished finish. I will seam this up by hand later, probably when I'm watching the Knicks Cavs game, or tomorrow morning when I'm watching the NCAA lacrosse women's finals. So with this kind of work, I really like that I have to bounce between my knitting machine and then sitting and doing some hand finishing. I know hand finishing can kind of be polarizing. I really like to do it. I do have a linker, which I'll show you in another video, that I use for some of my linking, just because, again, it creates a beautiful finished seam and it's a little bit more efficient. But sometimes for me, just knitting by hand and seaming by hand is relaxing. So I'll do that too. So up next for me is I'm going to be making another child size in the orange hat. And after that, I will make 2 toddler size hats in this brown sheep nature spun wool. So 1 in this black pepper and 2 in this snow white, which is kind of perfect. I kind of didn't realize it, but I'm also matching the colors of the hats. I tend to do that sometimes because I do wear a lot of natural colors with the periodical bright pink that I also really love bright pink. I can't get away from that, but I do really like the natural colors, and a lot of our designs reflect just what we love the most, which is the beauty of the natural world, really rich heritage colors that kind of go with everything. I mean, you want closet staples if you're going to spend the money on a piece of knitwear that are versatile with a lot of different items. You can dress them up, you can dress them down. And while I do really like flashy, eccentric knits as well, I think there's something to be said for really solid, elevated minimalist pieces that kind of make everything else look awesome. So I'll be working on these the rest of the day, and I'll keep recording, but I won't continue to do all the chattering away. So you can just see how I spend my afternoon and really how peaceful it is. I'm going to turn on the Giants game. They are playing the Chicago White Sox, so should be fun to watch. And then I'll turn on the Knicks and the Cavs later. Thanks all for joining me on this video. I appreciate the motivation and the excitement to get started filming these again and sharing a little bit about what I do with you all. I love this process. I love making things for everybody, and getting to share it with everyone as I grow is not my normal instinct as somebody on the more introverted side, but it's important to be fully transparent as Bears and Essentials grows. So I plan to continue doing that every step of the way. Thanks all for tuning in. I'll see you later.